Several years ago, when I worked in Texas, I was helping lead a youth camp. And the retreat center that we were at was out in the middle of nowhere. And you know the kind of center I'm talking about, where all the bunks are made of plywood and 4x4s, and all the food comes from industrial-sized cans, and everything is kind of deeply infused with the smell of Axe body spray. And one night, the kids were in their small groups, and it was our job, the youth minister's job, to go out in the middle of this field where we had wood for a bonfire. And we were supposed to get the fire going for s'mores and games later that night. It sounds simple enough. It was getting dark as we got out there. And there were four of us, four churches that had come together to put this camp on. And as we got out to the wood pile, one guy in our group saw a problem. "Hang on," he said. "Do we bring any kind of kindling or lighter fluid?" And there was this moment of hesitation, but then another member spoke up confidently. "No need," she said. "I brought this." And from her back pocket, she pulled out this long-neck green lighter. We all kind of stared at her for a second. "Right," the first minister said, "but we need something to light." "Well, duh," she answered. "That's what the wood is for." And then we all kind of watched, unsure what to say, as she proceeded to kneel down and hold the lighter to the biggest log and just kind of wait for it to ignite. Now, I'm the kind of guy who will usually give the benefit of the doubt, so my first thought was, oh, she clearly knows something I don't know. But this was not the case. The truth was, it was becoming increasingly clear she had never made a fire before. And although what she lacked in fire-making skills, she made up for in confidence. And after a minute, the first minister, who had spoken up to begin with, said, I don't know if that's going to work. I'm going to run back and see if I can find some lighter fluid, but maybe y'all gather some kindling while I'm gone, just in case." "Nah," the other minister said, "this'll catch. Wood burns." So we gathered the sticks and the leaves, and she actually just confidently held that lighter to the log until it ran out of fuel. And it wasn't until the first minister got back with supplies and then ran back for a new lighter that we actually got the fire going, just in time for the campers to come out looking for their s'mores. Good intention, I learned, does not always equal effective execution. And I think the same is true when it comes to being a student of Jesus' way. I mean, he didn't just go around saying, "All are welcome," and hoping for the best. He told stories where the marginalized were represented and celebrated. He created spaces where those pushed to the edges by purity systems and religious gatekeeping could find belonging. And he spoke out on their behalf when someone brought a challenge. He structured his leadership so women had active roles and authority and responsibility in a culture where that was not common. He didn't just hold out the lighter and hope for the best. He practiced creating intentionally welcoming spaces so that those around him could find belonging and safety and could thrive. That's the tradition that we stand in. And this Pride Sunday, it means that following Jesus on the way of love goes beyond a vague sense of welcome to intentionally creating spaces where queer folks can be safe, find belonging, and thrive. So this morning, I'd like to turn our attention to what that truly means to be a congregation that protects queer belonging, especially in a cultural and political moment like this. And I want to ask, what are the specific embodied practices that can help us foster these spaces of justice and belonging? And there are 5 that I would like to go through to find ourselves in. And in exploring these 5 practices, I hope that we can see ourselves more clearly and see more clearly who we are called to become. First, we practice belonging, not inclusion. Back in 2015, when Obergefell v. Hodges established same-sex marriage as a guaranteed right nationwide, a lot of Baptist churches started kind of scrambling to figure out what that meant for them. And as a result, I found myself in a lot of conferences about best language and practices when it comes to being more inclusive. Because inclusivity was the key word that everybody was using. And I remember one event where the speakers were talking about inclusion in one form or another, and they opened it up to audience feedback. And one participant got the mic and he said, you keep using this word inclusive. And I'm wondering about the intention behind it. The way you use it, I wonder if we're missing the point. You seem to have gotten this idea that we're going to open up the doors and all of these LGBTQ AI plus folks are going to rush in and want to be part of your church. But has it occurred to you that it might not be your church? That maybe it's always belonged to all of us, and we've been keeping some out? Have you considered that maybe if we let them in, you'll be changed too? I'm just saying maybe we should focus less on including queer folks at our table and more on realizing it's never been our table. We've all always belonged there. And now I know different people mean different things by that word, and I don't mean to get caught up in a nitpicky game of semantics, but that guy's point stayed with me. Whether that language is inclusive or welcoming, I realized a lot of churches can use it as a pretty low bar. If we're going to practice nourishing spaces of queer justice, then our practice has to be one of mutual belonging in shared power, of remembering that the table was never any one group's to begin with, but it has always belonged to everyone. And that requires a shift in imagination and how we tell the story of who we are and who owns this space and who belongs. We practice belonging, not just inclusion. Second, we practice naming the real enemy and not just the symptoms. And this one's a bit more complicated. In that same season, several years ago, I had this great idea for how I was going to end queer exclusion in the church. It was ambitious, but I had the confidence of a white man in his early 20s, and my logic was foolproof. See, I downloaded this software that created flowcharts, and I made a decision tree. And at the top, I put this question: do you think queerness is a sin? Stay with me. And then if you chose yes, it would take you down to the next question: where in the Bible does it say that being queer is a sin? And then you'd have the option to go down to one of the classic clobber passages written below. And from there, I had clearly articulated follow-ups to each, explaining these verses in context and suggesting an alternative hermeneutic that would take you to a place of affirmation and welcoming. Checkmate, bigots. I was going to logic people into grace. And in retrospect, I can see that was sort of the liberal equivalent of an evangelical tract. And now, is there a space for arguments like that? Sure. Reinterpreting scripture, reimagining theology, these create important pathways for people stuck on the inside looking for a way out. They were certainly helpful for me. But are they actually going to change anyone's mind who isn't already looking for a way out? I doubt it. And this is what I didn't understand. I thought in the work of queer justice, the enemy was ignorance, or narrow-mindedness, or bad theology. It was only later that I realized that these are just tools. They're symptoms. The real enemy, the man behind the curtain, is a system, the power structure known as patriarchy. Patriarchy, I learned, works like this. It teaches that there are certain things that are normal and holy, and other things that aren't. And those of us that can best abide by these standards of normal and holy get to be on top. We're entitled to positions of power. And now, what is the holiest and most normal? According to patriarchy, those standards include whiteness, maleness, and heterosexuality. And the more of those boxes you tick, the more power you're entitled to. And those who benefit from playing this game, those who have the power, want to protect this system as much as possible. And they'll fashion God into their own image and say, see, the ultimate authority. So why is this the enemy of queer justice? Because this system finds queerness inherently threatening. So patriarchy shames it with everything it can, including religion. Because the existence of a happy gay couple or the possibility of a thriving non-binary person totally messes with the categories. And if we don't have the categories, how do we decide who gets to be in charge? It's bad, it's wrong, it's sin. Patriarchy is fragile, and it knows it. And queerness, therefore, is a threat. A church that participates in queer justice, then, has to remember that the real enemy isn't narrow-mindedness or bad theology, but that those are weapons wielded by a bigger boss behind the scenes. Those are the powers and principalities that we resist, and we do that by dismantling the weapons, sure, but also going after the system itself. Breaking the norms on purpose to show how flimsy they are. Uprooting shame through belovedness. Sharing power equally to show that we are all stronger together when everyone is empowered. We practice naming the real enemy and not just the symptoms. Third, we practice ordinary belovedness. There's an interesting thing that happens when we look at the rhetoric of well-meaning liberal communities. These are communities that want to be inclusive in the best sense, and they'll say things like, we celebrate the courage of the LGBTQAI+ community, or queer folks have so much to teach us about chosen family and pride. And let me say up front, those things can be true. There are very many courageous queer folks, and they have beautiful spiritual gifts that have risen out of queer communities. And also, queer folks shouldn't have to become heroes to be safe. We want to practice the celebration of all people and the gifts they bring, certainly. But that doesn't mean that everyone has to bring some extraordinary wisdom or deep virtue in order to earn a place at the table. That can be a form of tokenism, turning queer people into props to make inclusive communities feel better. But failing to offer belonging in the most Mr. Rogers sense, recognizing that you are inherently special, just the way you are. And that's why we practice ordinary belovedness, ordinary belonging. And that means we practice creating spaces where everyone can show up just as they are, joyful, cranky, tired, trying their best and making mistakes. It means being mindful of the language we use to make spaces where we're free to be human, whatever that means to us in a given season. A place where courageous, resilient, queer heroes are welcome, sure, but so are queer people who don't know what they're doing and are just trying to figure it out. Who want a place that loves everyone as they are, and that's what we aim to practice. We should be a place where, as the poet Mary Oliver once said, you do not have to be good. You just have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. We practice ordinary belovedness. And fourth, we practice making sanctuary tangible. And let me explain what I mean by that. In the 1970s, there was a student at UC Berkeley whose name was Hale Zukas. Zukas was working on a degree in mathematics with a minor in Russian, and while he would later graduate with honors, Zukas struggled with cerebral palsy. He had difficulty controlling his limbs, which left him bound to a wheelchair, and when he spoke, often other people had difficult time understanding. In the civil rights era, Zukas was living in a world that increasingly claimed to be welcoming to all, especially at Berkeley. But Zukas knew, more than most, that claiming to be welcoming and actually being welcoming were two very different things. One example, there were curbs all over campus that Zukas would have a lot of trouble navigating in a wheelchair. And those of us who don't use wheelchairs may not think anything of a curb on a sidewalk, but to some, it might as well be a cliff. And it was things like this that daily reminded him this world was not structured for him. But here's the thing about Zukas. He was an activist. While he was a student, he rallied his allies, and together they began this initiative where they would take up sledgehammers and chisels and go out into the city every night, and they'd create curb cuts and makeshift ramps. They would chip the curb away, making the structural changes that created a campus that was actually welcoming to someone like Zukas. Eventually, the city got the message, and they wound up teaming up with Zukas and his friends to make the ramps permanent, and it was one of the first programs of its kind. To claim that a place is welcoming and to actually make the systemic changes, to make that welcome real, can be two different things. Likewise, when it comes to queer justice, safeness and ordinary belovedness can't just exist in ideology, but must also exist in physical spaces, practical language, and policy structures. We ask questions like, do our bathrooms enforce gender binaries? Do we normalize the clarification of pronouns? Do our wedding policies or children and youth protection policies make this a genuinely safe place? Does our leadership structure ensure there's shared power across difference? In a world where a lot of liberal churches can be satisfied to stop at rainbow flags and social media posts, what does it look like to actually go out with sledgehammers and chisels and follow through with the changes that genuinely foster belonging? We practice making sanctuary tangible. And finally, we practice paying attention in real time and responding with courage. One of Jesus' teachings that I think about often is when he sends his disciples out into the surrounding villages and he warns them that they have to be as innocent and as doves and shrewd as serpents. And I love that line because that is such a brilliant and practical thing to say. To me, that's always meant remain open to the spirit of love and also pay attention. Don't be naive. Be mindful of the situation you're in because there are those around you who wish you and your neighbors harm. So be loving, but never naive about what love can look like. In this cultural moment, the political realities around living or surviving as a queer person change weekly. We must likewise be innocent as doves and shrewd as serpents. We have to find sustainable rhythms to keep up with what the forces of patriarchy are up to, the new and creative ways they find to protect power and marginalize others. We have to be a place that keeps our finger on the pulse of local and national legislation, what local nonprofits are up to, and finding a rhythm of asking afresh, all right, now how might we embody love now, and now, and now? We practice paying attention in real time and responding with courage. There are certainly more than these 5 that we could spend time with, but those are the ones that rose up for me this week. And those are the ones I believe can help us in this season foster the right combination of intentions, skills, and tools to continue to foster the flame and build the fire beyond just holding the lighter to the wood and hoping for the best. I am deeply grateful to be a part of a congregation that takes those practices seriously, that weaves them into the DNA of our shared life and continues to be open to weaving them anew in new ways. May we continue to nurture the fire. May pride never become a 1 month out of the year or 1 Sunday out of the month, but a posture that we carry and a practice we embody. May it continue to run through the soul and structure of this place, and may we all thrive together. Amen.